Could this ancient Middle Eastern relic really produce electricity?
How could they have batteries almost 1,700 years before batteries existed?
Why is this 3,000-year-old Egyptian mummy screaming?
This person is being denied an afterlife for eternity. This is a huge deal.
And is this medieval device the hand of the world's first Iron Man?
To the untrained eye, it just looks like a gauntlet on a suit of armor. This is something far, far stranger and more technologically advanced.
These are the most remarkable and mysterious objects on Earth. Hidden away in museums, laboratories, and storage rooms. Now, new research and technology can get under their skin like never before. We can rebuild them, pull them apart, and zoom in to reveal the unbelievable, the ancient, and the truly bizarre. These are the world's strangest things. This priceless 2,000-year-old relic is the only one of its kind in the world. Since it was unearthed in Baghdad in 1936, it's become infamous as one of the most controversial finds of all time. For nearly 70 years, it was stored in an Iraqi museum. Now, it's gone.
In 2003, during the Iraq War, the Baghdad Museum was plundered, and it went missing.
But using the best available data, we've brought it back. Just 6 inches tall, at first glance it looks like a dusty old jar. But opening it up reveals something intriguing. A tube of copper and an iron rod.
And in between the two, you had this bitumen plug that separated the two items.
The archaeologist who finds it is struck by a similarity in this combination of parts. Not to anything from the ancient world, but something from the modern.
He basically, right there on the spot, thought that it may have been a battery.
Which is kind of a crazy sounding idea for something that's 2,000 years old.
Accepted history says the first known battery won't be invented until 1799.
How could they have batteries 1,700 years before when actually batteries existed?
It becomes known as the Baghdad Battery. No other jar like this has ever been found. What is it for? And could it really be an ancient electrical device? Why would an archaeologist identify it as a battery in the first place?
One of the challenges that we have in interpreting the past is that we do have a kind of natural inclination to bring our own frames of reference to what we're seeing. So it doesn't surprise me that something unusual like this might have been interpreted as a battery.
Most scholars were very skeptical. As an archaeologist, I would sort of test an idea, see if it's possible or feasible. If it's not, then I would discount it, say, okay, well, it's not that.
So the first question is, can it actually function as a battery at all?
A battery like this has 3 main components. There are 2 electrodes made of metal, called the anode and the cathode, and the substance in between those called an electrolyte. Electrolytes are liquids that allow for the flow of charged particles between the 2 electrodes. In a battery, it would commonly be an acidic liquid.
The copper and the iron in this ancient relic look strikingly like modern electrodes. And that's not the only similarity.
What's really exciting is that there's evidence of an acidic solution inside. As well as this, the electrodes show evidence of corrosion, which is exactly what we would expect to find inside a battery.
So it seems to have all the right parts, but can it actually make electricity? Scientific research has finally tested this idea.
People have done a reconstruction of the Baghdad battery and found that because of the chemistry and the materials involved, it kind of can't help but be a battery, which is really cool.
So, quite remarkably, the evidence suggests it really does work. But is this an accidental effect? Or are its makers actually trying to create electricity? Back in the 3rd century, this region of Mesopotamia is at the heart of the Sasanian Empire. And for the time, the people who live here certainly have a sophisticated culture. The capital city of Ctesiphon is a vast metropolis of 250,000 people.
One of the remains of Ctesiphon is this large arch that you see if you go outside of Baghdad. So clearly, the Sasanians were a very sophisticated society of very developed engineers.
If any civilization in this period is going to invent a battery, the Sasanians sound like a good prospect.
In fact, one of the most ancient universities was built by the Sasanians. They had an ancient school that brought scholars from India, from Rome, from the Greek world, to basically conduct science.
If the Sasanians really do create this mysterious object, what is it for? One theory suggests its electrical charge could be used for plating metal.
To do this, you put metal objects that you want to coat in a precious material into a vat of really nasty chemicals that contain gold, for example. When you pass a current through that solution, then the gold atoms stick to the metals that you want to plate, and what you end up with is a really thin layer of gold onto the metal surface.
And there's no shortage of gold-plated objects from this period to support this idea.
Plating gold, particularly on things like silver or other metals, was very typical. Gold, of course, was highly precious, highly desired, but it was also very expensive. So you often would put a plate of gold on another item to make it look like the entire item is made of gold, to give it that kind of gold shine.
But there are some issues with this theory.
The problem with the electroplating theory is that you would have needed a lot of Baghdad batteries to power it, and we've only found one.
There's an even bigger problem. The Sasanians already know how to plate gold.
There was a different process that was much better known and much easier to do called fire gilding, which would have achieved the same effect of plating these metal objects with gold. In fire gilding, what you do is you create an alloy out of gold and mercury. You apply that to the metal surface and then you heat it up, which boils away the mercury into the air to leave the gold on the surface. This is a ridiculously dangerous process and would have been extremely bad for the health of everyone involved in doing this fire gilding process. So we know that now, but they probably didn't know that back then.
The electroplating theory doesn't hold up. And there's an even more bizarre idea. Could this strange object have been for childbirth? The Baghdad Battery, a mysterious ancient device that produces an electric charge. What is it for?
There's been one argument that the device may have been used for a kind of electrotherapy, the idea of using electricity to numb the pain, perhaps in childbirth, labor. We do this in the modern world.
Surprisingly, using electricity in this way is not a new idea.
There are ancient texts from the ancient Greek world, the use of electric rays, for instance, electricity derived from animals that can be used to numb the pain for individuals. So that's indicating there is a precedent for this potential use of the battery for that purpose.
The problem with this theory is that there was no shortage of pain relief in this part of the world already.
Almost 2,000 years before this jar would have been made, you had texts discussing the use of things probably comparable to opium or even cannabis used to numb pain. So medicinal uses of different plants would have been a well-established practice in this part of the world.
So probably not a miracle pain relief. There seem to be flaws in every ancient battery theory. Maybe the answer is, it's not a battery at all.
The form and shape of the Baghdad battery is a very common shape. It's a very common looking jar, very plainly decorated. Such jars were often used to contain scrolls, parchment, effectively.
But if this jar is designed to hold scrolls, why is there acid residue inside it? And why the copper tube and iron rod? Any theory has to explain the function of all four key elements.
You have the liquid inside the jar, you had the jar itself, the two items, the rod and the cylinder, the fact that they're made of specific metals, you had iron and copper. So you had to come up with a solution that effectively brings it all together.
Now, there is a new idea, one that could explain everything.
A new and very exciting theory about the Baghdad battery is that it could have been used in the brewing of beer. When you ferment yeast to create beer, it also makes substances like hydrogen sulfide. This is a really smelly and disgusting material. You can smell it near volcanoes. It sort of smells like rotten eggs. And you really don't want that in your beer. So today, we take hydrogen sulfide out of beer using electrochemical processes.
In modern beer making, copper barrels are often used to remove smell and impurities from beer. So potentially the Baghdad battery is used for a similar purpose.
To get rid of the hydrogen sulfide from beer, what you can do is put a copper electrode into the beer and apply a voltage to it. When you do that, the hydrogen sulfide in the beer reacts with the copper to produce a solid material which just floats to the bottom of the vat, which you can then easily remove, which gets rid of your hydrogen sulfide. And it's possible that the Baghdad battery was used for the same process back then.
But did the Sasanians really care enough about beer to go to this much effort?
Beer was a big deal and had been for a long time. We know of brewing in Iraq from 3,500 BCE and possibly even older than that.
Beer was a very common beverage in this part of the world for a long time, perhaps even the preferred beverage, but it was also full of impurities. And so perhaps creating something that could diminish those impurities would have been an innovation that would have been desired by this period.
After 70 years of controversy, do we finally have an explanation for this strange object?
So I guess the question is, could the Baghdad battery have actually been part of a Baghdad brewery? Well, the beer is acidic, so yep, that would work for the electrolyte. The copper and the iron together create the voltage. The copper can take the hydrogen sulfide out of the beer. And we also see that corrosion on the electrodes. So yes, it could have worked in this way.
But like every theory about the Baghdad battery, there's a snag.
There's only one problem with this brewery theory, which is that the Baghdad battery itself is extremely small. So if it was used for brewing beer, it would have been the world's first craft beer.
Right now, proving this idea is impossible because the battery is still missing. Unless it's recovered, this new theory can't be properly tested. For now, at least, the Baghdad battery remains one of the world's most perplexing, unexplained objects. Locked away in a Cairo museum is one of the strangest Egyptian relics in history. Unlike the thousands of other mummies unearthed from the sands of Egypt that seem calm and composed, this one appears to be a snapshot of the true horror of death. Now, the body has been removed from its coffin and painstakingly reconstructed. This is the Screaming Mummy.
People think that the Screaming Mummy is screaming in agony. You know, it looks really horrific.
Even the gold earrings, lost after the body was discovered, have been digitally restored. They are definitely not the jewelry of a peasant. His body tells a similar story.
His hair was braided, he had henna on. All of this actually suggests that what we have here is a man of extreme status.
Yet this emaciated body looks nothing like other high-status Egyptian mummies.
Normal mummies would be wrapped in linen bandages, which were symbolically important. It's really shocking that this mummy is not.
And his hands and feet look like they were tied up.
Why was he buried in this really disturbing manner?
Who is he? Why is he screaming? Now, the latest scientific analysis can reveal not only his identity, but the truth behind his gruesome demise. The screaming mummy is discovered in the late 19th century, near Egypt's legendary Valley of the Kings. And he isn't found alone.
Basically, this was the discovery of a cache of mummies. So there were about 40 in there, most of them richly decorated with coffins and sarcophagi and things like that. Some of the mummies in this cache are actually quite well known, what we might say are household names from ancient Egypt. So, for example, Ramses II.
Ramses II ruled for more than 60 years and is considered one of ancient Egypt's greatest pharaohs.
So this certainly wasn't just a group of unimportant people, but rather a bringing together of some of the biggest names in ancient Egypt.
But inside one of the coffins, archaeologists make a shocking discovery.
So when they opened up the lid of the coffin, they were really surprised to find the body of a young man whose face was contorted in what seems like agony.
With no clue to his identity, archaeologists label him Unknown Man E. What is this macabre body doing amongst such exalted company? Forensic analysis just adds to the mystery.
You don't see any calluses, no thick skin. The person had beautiful earrings. The fingernails were manicured. The person was in good health as far as we could see.
This is not a man who works for his living. Combined with the location of his burial, this suggests he is a member of ancient Egypt's ruling elite. But there's a problem with that theory. His simple wooden coffin looks nothing like the others.
It's not highly decorated. So really, this is a huge question. Why is this man of high status being buried in this completely plain coffin?
Worse still, it doesn't record his name. This is almost unheard of in elite burials.
This is not a small thing for the ancient Egyptians. Names were tied intrinsically to your body. So if you wanted to have a successful transition into the afterlife, you needed to have your body intact, and part of that was having a recognizable name.
Everything about Egyptian burials is to assist your journey after death.
If you were buried properly, the idea would be that you could go into the afterlife, you could be in the field of reeds, which was the ancient Egyptian conception of what we might call heaven, and you lived a life of paradise.
The nameless coffin sends a stark message.
The implication of burying someone without their name is huge when it comes to ancient Egyptian theology. This really means that this person is being denied an afterlife for eternity. This is a huge deal.
The other essential component of a successful journey into the afterlife is mummification.
Mummification was an extremely elaborate process. You would start by removing the brain and the internal organs, washing the body and cleansing it with salt.
But a forensic examination of the corpse reveals something even more shocking than the nameless coffin.
If you look at the skull of the mummy, you see that the brain is still there. That is very unusual because the brain should have been removed.
The abdomen of the body is also unmarked, suggesting the other organs are still in place.
And that is something, especially for a person from a very high social rank, that's something that I've never seen before.
And the material covering the corpse is completely out of place for a high-status burial.
It's really shocking that this mummy is wrapped not in linen, but in a sheepskin.
I've seen a lot of mummies, but none was ever wrapped into a skin of an animal that has a bad meaning or an unclean meaning, like a sheep. So that is something that is very, very unusual and very offensive for that person.
So if we bring all of this together, the fact that there's no name on the coffin, the fact that he was wrapped in sheepskin, and the fact that his organs weren't removed, this all adds up to the idea that someone has done this intentionally and that this man is being completely denied a chance at living in the afterlife.
A member of the elite, buried in a royal tomb, his body treated with contempt, his soul damned to oblivion. Who is this cursed man? The Screaming Mummy, a 3,000-year-old unidentified corpse, twisted in agony. For nearly 130 years, the identity of unknown man E remains a mystery. Now, 21st century forensics have been brought to bear on the body.
In the late 2000s, an Egyptian archaeologist named Zahi Hawass commissioned a number of DNA analyses. What these analyses tell us is that he was the son of one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, Ramses III. Ramses III is quite a big deal in ancient Egyptian history. He had a number of military campaigns that he oversaw, and he built on an incredibly prolific scale. To some Egyptologists, he's actually the last of the great pharaohs.
If the Screaming Mummy is the son of a living god, what can he have done to deserve this terrible fate? An ancient document located 2,000 miles away in Turin, northern Italy, might hold the key. It's known as the Judicial Papyrus.
It seems to record the trial of a number of people who were high up in the court for conspiracy to assassinate Ramses III. Pharaohs in ancient Egypt were able to marry a number of wives, however many they liked, really, and these wives would usually be ranked. The Judicial Papyrus actually talks about a lesser queen whose name was Ti, and the fact that she had managed to recruit a huge number of courtiers, people of real power.
The papyrus claims that this lesser queen, a wife of Ramses III, plotted to murder him.
And it goes on to suggest that Queen Ti had created this conspiracy in order to put her own son on the throne, and that son's name was Pentawere.
The story recorded in this ancient document is a dark tale of conspiracy and murder. One that might finally reveal the identity of the Screaming Mummy.
From the DNA test, we know that this is one of the sons of Ramses III. And we also know that he was buried in disgrace. So if we put that together, there's only one solution. This must be Prince Pentawere.
There's one problem with this theory. Other than the papyrus, the name Pentawere appears absolutely nowhere else in ancient Egypt.
There's a very real possibility that Pentawere wasn't his real name and that actually this is a pseudonym used specifically so that his real name wouldn't be said, because the action of saying someone's name gives them life.
The Screaming Mummy may have been at the center of a treasonous plot. But did the plot succeed?
On the one hand, we have the Judicial Papyrus, at which Ramses III seems to be opening proceedings and presiding over the entire trial. However, he is referred to as the Great God, which is often a title reserved for people who were dead. So the judicial papyrus doesn't actually give us a firm answer as to whether the plot against Ramses III was successful or not.
In 2007, Ramses III's mummy is scanned using 21st century CT technology. The results are shocking.
Under the linen, which was carefully placed and arranged there was a deep wound stretching from the front back to the spine. And that means that the veins here on his sides of the neck were cut. And that means the brain doesn't get any oxygen and you die instantly. Meaning that he was assassinated.
As the most important man in ancient Egypt, there is no doubt that Pharaoh would have been extremely closely guarded. And this suggests that anyone who got to him may have been someone close to him.
Someone like a son, which may explain why Pentaweri is damned to oblivion.
By killing this person who is seen to be a living god, you are committing the most heinous crime possible. The conspirators who were found guilty of being part of this plot actually were handed down some pretty heavy-duty sentences.
28 of them are sentenced to death. Royal members of the plot are ordered to commit suicide. Is this the fate of the screaming mummy? On the withered corpse is one final clue.
You see kind of indentations on the wrists. That means that the person was probably or most likely restrained before death, because you even find pieces of leather inside of the tomb. So, I mean, why would the person be restrained?
The fact that his hands were bound does suggest that if this was suicide, it was probably more likely to be assisted suicide.
We know his name and his fate. One final question remains. Why is he screaming? Why is this mummy screaming? It turns out he's not alone.
Screaming mummies exist everywhere. You see some screaming mummies in Sicily, in Italy, in Middle and Southern America. Wherever you see mummies, you often see the scream.
But are they really screaming at all?
The screaming mummy looks as if it was screaming because it is poorly prepared. This is not done with love. In most cases, when mummies are produced, the lower jaw is bound so that it doesn't open up. If you don't bind the jaw, then you have joints over here and over there on both sides, and then your lower jaw will just drop. And that obviously looks as if you were screaming. So it's just an accidental thing that happens by gravitational forces.
The reason he appears to be screaming says as much about us as it does about the Egyptians.
It is completely normal that we see emotions, facial expressions in a face of a living or a dead body. This is because our brain is just hardwired in a way, because it is absolutely necessary to very quickly find out which emotion another person has to react properly.
When we see a face with a gaping mouth, its head thrown backwards, our brains instantly compare it to what we know. And the closest resemblance to Pentaweri's face is a scream. So it seems this corpse isn't actually screaming. But that doesn't stop the face from looking profoundly disturbing. Locked forever in an expression of agonizing torment. In a glass cabinet in Jagsthausen Castle, deep in the German countryside, lies one of the world's most incredible objects.
To the untrained eye, it just looks like a gauntlet that you might see on a suit of armor. This is something far, far stranger and more technologically advanced.
Now, painstakingly reconstructing it using cutting-edge imaging technology, reveals it in forensic detail. It's a 500-year-old medieval marvel, a mechanical iron hand with a 7-inch long cuff, the only one of its kind in the world. Its fingers are fully articulated, and inside is a complex mechanism of cogs and springs. Its owner, Gertz von Berlichingen, made extravagant claims for this device.
The iron hand allows him to hold a glass, wield a sword, ride a horse, and all these things made you like pretty manly and active and virile.
It sounds fantastic, and maybe that's all it is. Because Gertz has a well-earned reputation as a man given to wild and extravagant claims.
At the end of the day, people thought, is it all true, what he's writing there? Did his hand really properly work?
Why was this device built? Did it really work? And who was the man with the iron hand? He lives in 15th century Germany. It is a brutal, violent place.
The Germanic area was divided up into dozens of little principalities. Some of them were ruled by princes, some by dukes. They're all at each other's throats, all trying to get their bit bigger than somebody else's. And it's enormously chaotic. You know, the same political situation isn't in place more than about 3 weeks before, bing, it's all change again.
This is the world in which Gertz von Berlichingen lives.
He was born in 1480 and he was a knight by the age of 17. At the age of 20, he became a freelancer, so to speak.
Gertz may be called a knight, but in reality, he's an infamous mercenary.
He had his own gang and he was a weapon to hire. Anybody could hire the gang and then they would go there and fight for that person. And he was killing people and robbing people and making money out of that.
Then, at the age of 24, it all goes wrong for him.
In 1504, Götz is fighting for a Bavarian duke, and during one of the battles, a cannonball hits his arm and slices off his hand and a part of his arm.
Before antibiotics, such wounds are often fatal. Gertz is in luck. He survives, but he loses his right forearm and hand. It seems his days as a fighting knight are over.
Whilst Götz is in bed, being ill, he's not giving up. He's trying to figure something out. He wants to continue to do his job, so he designs a new arm and hand for himself to grab a weapon and to continue to kill.
He certainly isn't the first person to come up with the idea of artificial body parts.
I think there's a general idea that prosthetics haven't been around for that long. There are a couple of really good examples from ancient Egypt, the best of which is probably a prosthetic toe that was designed to go onto the right toe of a noblewoman. It's really amazing. It's made of wood and leather. It has a hinge so that it can move with her foot's movement more easily, and it has a nice leather strap for comfort, we think.
Even the Romans get in on the act.
Pliny the Elder describes a man who he finds to be incredibly heroic. His name is Marcus Sergius Celus. He is famous for having his arm cut off in battle and refusing to step down, and he actually had an iron bit added onto his arm, the shield side arm, to hold up a shield so that he could continue fighting. He was unhorsed numerous times. He went on to fight numerous battles.
But Gertz has a vision of something far more sophisticated.
Götz goes to a blacksmith and really tries to find something that works, not just a hook or a wooden stump or something, but something that really allows him to continue to function and to work.
2 years after losing his hand, Goetz is back on the battlefield with a metal prosthetic. But he's not satisfied with his first attempt.
First one was still relatively remarkable in that it would open and close, but more of a binary on and off sort of grip. But the second version is truly remarkable.
What Goetz comes up with appears to be a uniquely sophisticated iron hand.
The brief he must have taken to his blacksmith was pretty incredible. He wanted to have each individual digit fully articulated, and he wanted to be able to hold a sword and take it into battle. That is a pretty incredible list of demands to take to a 16th century blacksmith.
It sounds astonishing, and Goetz certainly tells everyone it is. But does it actually work? Now, new research can finally answer that question. Goetz von Berlichingen's 500-year-old iron hand is a masterpiece of medieval engineering.
Challenge in building the prosthetic hand is having a combination of being able to move and adapt the grip, but then actually when you're ready to hold it, to actually have it fixed into a very robust mechanical hold, say, especially in the case of Goetz, if he's holding a sword or the rein of a horse, he needs for that to be a very tight grip.
To understand just how clever Goetz's hand is, you need to look at the mechanisms inside it. The key is a ratchet and pawl system. A ratchet has a series of teeth. A pawl falls into each tooth as it rotates. And because of the shape of the teeth, the pawl prevents the joint going backwards. To do that, the pawl has to be lifted clear. It's exactly the same mechanism still found in handcuffs. In the iron hand, each finger contains 3 of these mechanisms that can lock every knuckle joint in place. So Goetz can use his good hand to push the metal fingers around an object until the grip is tight enough. The ratchet and pawl keeps it that way. Pressing a small button on the side of the hand disengages the pawl and releases the ratchets, allowing the hand to open. Another button on the back allows the hand to pivot at the wrist joint. Goetz tells everyone how fantastic his new hand is.
Goetz claimed that his new hand and arm rendered more service in the fight than did his original hand and arm out of flesh and bone.
The problem with Goetz is that he is famously economical with the truth.
He would write a beautiful autobiography, and of course it would only show the best of him. He would not tell about murder and robbing people all the time, but he would always see that he's, represented in a good light.
So can Goetz really hold a glass, grip the reins of his horse, and wield a sword as he claims? Over the last 500 years, there's been no shortage of doubters. Now, new research can finally settle it once and for all.
The University of Offenburg, they studied the design of the hand.
The research has started with his simpler Mark I hand.
They actually used 3D printing technology to replicate the design. And part of what that study demonstrated was the extremes that the hand was able to achieve, from relatively robust grips that would be used, say, in battle, all the way to the more finely dexterous applications such as holding a pen.
The Mark I hand contains many of the key technologies that Goetz refines in the Mark II. So, based on this research, it seems Goetz isn't boasting. His mechanical hand really does work.
This is effectively a 500-year-old, almost fully functioning mechanical prosthetic iron hand.
Perhaps the proof of just how well it works is the life Goetz lives.
After losing his hand, Götz continues to live for 58 years. And his work was plundering, murdering, and drinking, gambling, so his hand quite obviously worked very well.
Götz has become a German folk hero, and it's all because of something that happened 200 years after his death.
Götz would probably not be known if German national poet Goethe would not have put him into one of his plays, a very famous play. In this play, Götz is quoted as saying in German, "Er möge mich im Arsche lecken," which roughly translates into "kiss my ass," but actually it's much worse.
Götz's Iron Hand is centuries ahead of its time. A fully functioning medieval prosthetic. The latest state-of-the-art electronic prosthetics appear to have moved on a long way from Götz's cranks and levers. Neuromusculoskeletal prostheses connect the prosthetic directly into the user's nerves, muscles, and skeleton. Through the use of electrodes, it's even possible for the wearer to control a prosthetic with their mind. Götz's Iron Hand seems like a relic of the distant past, but the researchers who test his design don't agree. They believe it could have far-reaching consequences for people all around the world.
Pieces like Götz's are still relevant today because of the cost of prosthetics. And so especially in some geographies, they just can't afford some of the most advanced prosthetics. So systems like Götz's could still be very, very useful.
So, ironically, it's possible in the future there may be people around the world who will owe a huge debt of gratitude to a man who made a very successful career out of robbery and murder. If Götz knew this was going to happen, he'd probably have put it in his autobiography. Anything to make him sound good.